Okay, I am pressed for time and I need to get out the door here. So I'm going to do a speed recording about a very large topic about AOVs. So AOVs are these like alternative outputs that you could have within a 3D rendering program. And it started, especially a way to kind of composite things and have a little more control, especially when we had renders that were took too long to make physically accurate images. So they're still used a lot in a variety of different ways. And in this context, I have a student that's interested in just understanding how to integrate rendering and map painting and things like that. So being able to separate the parts so that you could tweak parts of the rendering and various properties is the goal here. So I'm going to do this very, very quickly. As I said, I'm pressed for time. But the very first thing is just to do a search for Redshift and Aovs, if that's the render you're using. That's what I'm using here in Cinema 4D. And inside this, there's a basic introduction. The other thing that's nice is they have this broken down into the commonly used, some standards as it relates to these other compositing programs, the big three. And then it starts to get a little more funky, right? You get down to these utility AOVs that we might use. And then I'm going to use a couple of these in the setup. So what is the right balance? Kind of depends on what you're trying to do. And I don't have time in this tutorial to cover all that. I think the main thing is just to start seeing how you can break down the render into layers that you can manipulate after the fact. So let us put this away. Please refer, as always, to the documentation. And I'm using a model done last semester by Braxton, one of our students. The assignment was about mechanical bug-like structures. I think this fits that requirement. But I thought I just needed something where I could show some of the layers very quickly. This is great. So he built this. I set up just kind of the camera and some lighting as a demo. So we'll use that. Now, I've already done some of this. In fact, maybe I will just go into the, I can get to this two places, Redshift or under render, but I need the Redshift Aov Manager, right? And here are all these, the options that I've loaded. So let me kind of break this down just a little bit. Now, the first one is the beauty. That just means all the pieces together. So it's like, here's what the final image kind of looks like according to the render. And then here are all the pieces. And you can organize these in the list. And I think this has bearing on how, when it renders out, what's on the top and what's on the bottom. Okay. I'm going to come back to this diffuse filter here in a second, but diffuse lighting is lighting that's coming directly from the lights themselves, set up in the scene, and it's kind of the non-reflection lighting, if you want to think of it that way. Global illumination is the indirect bouncing light in the scene. The specular light is the sharp highlight reflections, kind of, that is coming from the lights that are in scene. I have a bunch of area lights. The reflections are what they are, right? The reflections bouncing back around. We talked about beauty. The crypto matte, I'll show this in a second. This is a way of just rendering out things to use for a matte purpose. I'll come back to this. And the other one here is diffuse filter. So this is rendering out so that I just get the material color. I'm not going to get any shading. And we're going to look at these here in a second. In fact, I've already rendered this, so I'll show what this looks like so we don't have to wait for it. But these are the pieces here. All I did was double click or drag these into the section here, right? So this one's called depth, and it just gave it the name, the Z, so it's the Z depth. I don't want to use that here. And there's just so many of these. Some of these are funky. Some of these are the core of what you would want a lot of the time. I don't have subsurface scattering in here because I don't have any of that playing out in any of the materials. There's no subsurface material in there. So again, you build these based on what you need for the setup. And again, just go to that wonderful breakdown of the main ones, and then you can see the utility ones. I'm using all the main ones except for these utility ones here, the diffuse filter and the crypto mat. So if I go, let's open window, the picture viewer here. So a minute ago, I did the did a render. I rendered the picture viewer. In the settings, I guess I should show this. Under save, I turned off the regular image and I said save a multi-pass image. You could use OpenEXR Photoshop. For whatever reason, my OpenEXR wasn't loading right in Photoshop. I'm probably missing something. So I just went with Photoshop. I made sure that it was 16-bit depth. I could go all the way to 32 if so desired, but 16 is enough for this. And I think these were already set, the multi-layer file and the layer name. So if I put out individual files, just like the naming structure, again, the main thing is just to turn this on, and then I did render to picture viewer, and of course I saved it to location. If I look at this in the picture viewer, and you can change these things while the render is happening, I have noticed a few times that it looks a little buggy, so I just stopped the render and closed picture viewer and tried it again, and it seemed to load correctly. But every once in a while, I got some strangeness out of it. Okay, so I can click on image, single pass, or the multi-pass. So the image is just like the beauty. That's just like the one single image. The single pass is all of the different passes, right? And if I click on them, it shows me each of those, right? Sorry, you probably hear my cats in the background being annoying. So the beauty one, like here's the image, right? Here's what all the pieces come together. And then we'll kind of work our way maybe from the top. So here's the diffuse filter, and this is just to get these colors, just the kind of the flat shade out of this. There's a diffuse lighting, right? And so you see everything's flat, like there's no reflections in it, because that's what this is just the diffuse. But it does have the lighting. You can see the shadows coming from the area lights. Here we're getting, this is the bounce light that's just coming from the scene around the room, also from this kind of funky light here because it's self-illuminating. We've got the specular lighting. So this is, think of this as kind of the hard reflective lighting that's coming from the light sources. Again, you can see the shadows here. And then just the pure reflections, right? Just the reflections that are happening and bouncing around the scene. The beauty we already looked at, and then the funky crypto mat. And this one, if I look at the AOV Manager, this is the only one where you might want to change something, where if I click on any of these, there's settings over here. The only one that I changed in the crypto mat is I just told it to assign the ID based on the object name. So if you wanted these colors to be associated with materials, I would get a different result, right? If they all, whatever had the same material, they would all get exactly the same color. But this is just in Photoshop, as you would imagine, this one object here, if I click on it and I set the magic wand tolerance to 1 or 2 or 3, I'm just going to get this color, right? It's just that flat color. So it just aids in the selection if I want to edit various areas. Okay. So let me put this away and let's go back to the Photoshop. And let's do File, Open, and we've got a little... All right, so this comes in, you might be like, okay, this is, it's a little messed up. All the layers are set up to add on top of each other. So what I'm gonna do is, first of all, I'm gonna just turn off the crypto mat because I'm not gonna use that for the final image. I just wanna use that as something that I can make selections from, right? It's just a mask, a colored mask, a utility mask. I'm gonna put the beauty up at the top, and I'm going to change its blending mode just to normal. So this is a way for me to compare how close the final Redshift render is to how I'm compositing, just for comparison's sake, and I'm going to turn it off. So you can see already these are pretty close to each other, right? And what's happening is all of these are being added on top of each other with its brightness to give me a final image. And you can see it's really pretty close in the beauty. I'm probably missing, I'm not even sure what, maybe I need a shadow pass or something. And what else is on that I might want to turn on? Maybe, no, that's one, I wanted that one there. So anyways, this is just something that you can look at. And of course you can make changes in, oops, let's turn beauty off, right? So you can see where the light is coming to give this reflection. So a nice thing here is I could tone down the specular highlights on this one, right? Maybe maybe I want to tone down all that intensity. Maybe it's too much. So this is why you do it. Instead of re-rendering, you can go back into your compositor or Photoshop, whatever, to make these changes. The diffuse filter, in fact, let's do this. Let's turn the matte on, and I'm going to put this at the top and put it in normal just so I can see it, right? And I did a relatively small render, so the resolution's not great. But if I just go into the magic wand, you can see I can select an area, right? So I just want maybe this one, and I'll just create a new layer. And inside of this, I'll just, did I select a color? Let's make something kind of reddish. I'm going to make it dark because it's going to be additive to the thing. And I'll do edit and just fill. Right, so I'm going to add that color on this one here, and I'll just set this to linear add, turn off. So you can see, you know, I mean, it's just the simplest example, right? So I can change colors or pattern that's involved in that kind of diffuse map. This is probably not the best example of why you would want to do this a certain way, but you can see you have some control over the that setup. If I go back, let's turn down our specular highlight a little bit more, and let's turn down the reflections a little bit more, right? So a lot of different control. I can use this crypto mat, right? And again, there's various settings in the crypto mat, and there are ways that you can, you know, manually say, I want this and this and this and this to all be in a mat one way or the other. But if you're just trying to get all the little pieces, you know, I can always just make sure I'm doing multiple selections, and I could say, you know, let's go back to this. Right? I can get multiple pieces, right? And then do onto that layer, edit, fill. Right, so it's a quick way to get your selections going. So that's kind of nice, right? A lot of pretty cool control. And of course, I'm adding to this layer. You know, maybe I want to play with the color a little bit differently. I can burn it down in there, right? So then it looks a lot more exactly like the color, but I'm still getting the lighting information. So now that I've gone with this dark, let's go back to the specular. Let's turn that back up. And let's turn the reflections back up, right? So you can see I can come back and just make edits to the that surface. Of course, I just made it a color. I could paint kind of a pattern on there, and then I have all the lighting information to layer into that. So that's pretty cool, right? And let's just get rid of that selection, right? There are some tricks with dealing with the edges. I'm going to leave that for another. As far as rendering these out in the raw format and dealing with anti-aliasing. I'm not going to get into that part here, but I just wanted to show how you can use those layers one way to affect your that final image after the fact. Okay, almost 15 minutes, perfect. Refer to the documentation. We just load the AOVs here. So if you're like, well, what does this one do? Look it up in the documentation and just put it in the list. Just see what you get out of this. And you can understand how that works. In the Photoshop setup, if you're using these here, so let's go to the diffuse lighting. You can see how to add the diffuse lighting AOV to the primary AOV composite. So it just says, take this result and add it on top of everything else. And that's why, and you can see there's a lot of examples in here of how these are all, you know, put together, I guess, right? To give you what you want. And they're showing some nuke compositing, how these would all put together. But you're really just adding these, right? So you have a background, and then you add everything on top of it. Okay, so that's the documentation. Render to picture viewer, you can look at this in various ways. Let's turn those off, right? So there's what the render looks like when all these are added together. And within the scene here, I could play with, let's do that one, right? So I can even see what the effect would be in here if I were to tweak those down. Save it off to Photoshop, load, and have fun.